It was morning. The cloudy sky was a harbinger of rain. Suddenly a heavy downpour began, thunder rumbled, lightning flashed, but the summer rain slowly gave way to the flying wind, which quickly dispersed the clouds. As they fled, they cleared the sky for the rays of the rising sun. Mark opened his eyes. His wife was still asleep, smacking her lips sweetly in her sleep. He looked into the beautiful face of the woman he loved. How beautiful she is! I love her so much. Mark's first wife died 5 years ago of asthma, and attempts to save her were unsuccessful. She could not bear children. The knowledge that her husband was healthy and his desire to have a child compounded the guilt and her failing health. Earlier, as a student, before she met Mark, she had a secret abortion at home, and here are the consequences: infertility. For a long time, she did not confess to her husband. Then she got sick, her asthma progressed, and there was no need to confess. Before she died, she confessed to her husband about the infertility and the endless lies, justifying herself with the fact that she loved him very much. She asked for forgiveness, knowing that neither he nor God would forgive her sin. Mark, now a widower, thought, did I love my wife? I could not find the answer why she lied for so long. I would understand, but she made a mistake in her youth. Everything can be forgiven, but not lying. She left his life, and there was an emptiness in his soul. The years went by like a whirlwind. No children, and he is far from being a boy. Short-term relationships with women did not bring him happiness. None of them became his native and close in spirit. He recently turned 44 years old. More than 2 years ago, he met a woman who was 8 years younger than he was. Beautiful, charming, cheerful, with a sense of humor, she somehow immediately fell into his soul. She lived not far from him, but in another city. They met for 4 months. He came to her, she came to him. Mark fell in love with Lena, that was her name, and soon asked her to marry him. He knew he liked her, but was unexpectedly rejected. Lena, knowing about his past life, said, I'm sorry, but I can't deceive you. I've been married. As a child, I fell under the ice, skating, rescued, was sick, and as a result of this cold, I cannot have children. However, I did not separate from my husband for this reason. He loved alcohol and his friends more than me. Lena's confession puzzled the man, but 2 weeks later he made her another offer. I'm probably not meant to have children, and it's already too late. I loved you. Thank you for telling me the truth. How do you feel about me? Tell me how it is. Lena put her arm around Mark's shoulders. I love you too, to be honest. I've never known true love in my life. It's up to you. They got married. They had been together for almost 2 years. Mark believed that Lena was his destiny. The clock struck 7 in the morning. Lena opened her eyes, stretched out sweetly with a smile on her face, and kissed her husband. Are you awake? Yes, no. I looked at you and admired you. I am so happy to be with you. That evening, Mark left on a business trip to Detroit. He worked as a chief engineer in an aircraft factory, with special powers and unrivaled authority. Lena worked as a psychologist at the same company. All day long the wife fed her husband, cooked him various delicious things. The doorbell rang. Lena opened the door and saw her friend Mark, also known as the head of the technical department of the aircraft factory. Mark was surprised. What is it? replied the cheerful and clever Connor. "Don't worry. There are some problems on the way to the airport. We'll discuss them. We'll ride in my Jeep and talk at the same time. I hope you don't mind." "No, we've just talked about everything." "All right, go downstairs. I'll be right out." Mark said goodbye to his wife, kissed her, and promised he'd be back soon. "Okay, honey, I'll be waiting. I love you. Call me when you get on the plane." "Bye, honey." "I will. I will." The door closed. Once outside, Mark got into the Jeep. "Let's go, what's up?" Connor started to clarify some questions on the blueprints again, so that Mark wouldn't forget. "My dear friend, what's the matter with you? You know I'm well trained. I've done my job before. You're testing me like a schoolboo." "Mark, it's nothing. I just thought I'd say goodbye." "Are you my fiancé?" "It's a miracle." Already at the airport, Connor was as nervous as a girl. We were more than half an hour away from check-in. "Well, start talking," Mark repeated mockingly with a smile. "Don't interrupt me, please." "Mark, return your ticket. We'll call in sick and I'll go. You know, I've eaten my way through my job too, maybe less than you. The next thing you know, you're calling your wife, telling her you're going. You're going to sit in the airport for another 3 hours, maybe less. You go to a restaurant, have a drink, calm down, and only then you take a cab home without telling anyone. Remember, I'm your friend. I'd give my head for you, you know that. I can't keep quiet anymore. I know exactly where and how I got the news. I won't tell you. Your wife has a date with a pilot this evening. He's coming to her house. I've hinted to you before that she's very free with men, but you wouldn't listen. You'd rather tear me to pieces than believe me. Many people in the factory gossip about your wife's infidelity. Some saw her with a civilian, some with a pilot, maybe more than one. I can't have your name in the gossip columns. You're a well-known man in this town, and this gossip has got to stop. It's been going on for over 6 months. You know, when I got the tape of the pilot talking to your wife on the phone, I stopped doubting. Trust, but verify. That's the old saying. If I'm lying, you can do whatever you want to me. You can spit in my face, smash my face, I'll take it, but I want you to sort it out yourself. It's not right. I'm offended and hurt for you. You have the key to the apartment. You can come in after 1 o'clock in the morning. The rest you'll figure out on your own. I'm asking you to control yourself. Please, I'm begging you. Connor was silent. Mark was silent. Then he said softly, "Are you crazy? What kind of games are you playing? I do not believe it. I see how she treats me. She is sincere. Even in bed, she keeps telling me about love and how happy she is that I met her along the way. I can't imagine for a moment that she could lie so skillfully. It's crazy. Go to hell." The announcer announced check-in for the flight to Detroit. Mark stood up, checked in his ticket, and turned back to Condor. "Go ahead and leave. I'm waiting or we'll have a fight, you understand?" Connor leaned back in his chair and realized that Mark's head was already blown off by this news, and now he had to go home and check it out. "So, Connor, I assume you have a ticket for this flight?" Connor nodded. "Go, return your ticket and go. You don't even realize the humiliating position you put me in. No, you've put me in the shit. Connor understood everything in his heart. He could even imagine himself in his place. It was really difficult for a decent man to understand and accept such a challenge, let alone go spying. Mark, I'm sorry. Time will show. If you're not ready today, fly to Detroit. He patted his friend on the shoulder, wished him a soft landing, and left. Squeezing his head with his hands, Mark didn't want to believe that his wife had betrayed him. His thoughts were confused as he felt a terrible pain in his chest. After taking a pill, he realized that the stone is thrown, and it is not so easy to catch it and throw it out of his heart. They announced boarding. Mark sat in his chair. After a few minutes, the announcer announced the name of the late passenger who had checked in and invited him to board. Mark continued to sit with his hands unclasped and his head down. What should I do? I can't work in peace in Detroit. Dirty thoughts are eating my brain. On the phone, he dialed his wife's number and confirmed it in a calm voice. I'm off. Bye. He heard his wife's cheerful voice wishing him a safe trip. Mark sat in the waiting room for over 2 hours. He never turned in his ticket. He went outside. The rain was drizzling again, covering the asphalt with a wet film of water that reflected the glare of the burning lanterns. The air, soaked with the freshness of the rain, seemed to soothe my face. My head ached terribly, and my thoughts asked the same question: what to do? Inside, the mind said, go home. The soul protested, you don't want this truth, you are afraid of it, but you still have to decide something, the mind said stupidly. Mark took a taxi home. His heart was pounding, the veins at his temples were throbbing. He had been standing under the door for more than half an hour, but there was no point in delaying. Quietly he entered the hallway and saw a man's jacket. Gathering all his will into one fist, he commanded himself, I am calm, now only perseverance is needed. The man's face seemed to be petrified, and his expression was devoid of any emotion. Mark realized, first of all, calmness, equanimity, hidden contempt, no hysteria. This would be the strongest blow, similar to a knockout. But the thought frightened him. Anger, jealousy, rage boiled up. But no, this isn't my thing. I know what to do. He put on his soft slippers and went into the living room. The round table, set for dinner, looked unsightly. An open bottle of cognac and a drunken bottle of champagne lay on the table. Beautiful plates of leftovers nestled next to the bottles. On one of the chairs hung the clothes of a military pilot. On another, the beautiful Chinese dress of his wife was carelessly thrown. Red roses in a vase and a beautiful box of chocolates decorated the coffee table. They were gone when I left, Mark thought wistfully. He walked into the kitchen, where a stucco archway connected it to the dining room. He sat down in a chair and tried to collect his thoughts. A little later he returned to the living room, collected the dirty dishes, took them to the kitchen, washed them, put them on a towel. He went back inside, took the airman's clothes, cleaned them thoroughly, ironed them, and hung them on a chair in the living room. In the hall, he cleaned his boots and put them next to the clothes. His wife's robe hung neatly next to the men's clothes. Softly stepping on the soft carpet, he went to the bedroom door, opened it a little, and saw a couple in love in each other's arms. The man's hand rested on his wife's white, voluptuous breasts. The bedroom was a bit stuffy. The Chinese silk sheets barely covered their naked bodies. A mask of pleasure and total sexual satisfaction was frozen on the lovers' faces. The shamelessness of his wife threw him off balance. It was as if a devil had taken over Mark's body, blinded his eyes, plugged his ears, and turned him into a stone monster. Closing the door, Mark walked into the kitchen, sat down tiredly on a chair, his thoughts leaving his head. A void had formed inside him. It was as if he was chained to the chair. His tongue no longer obeyed him. Mark felt as if his life was dying within him. The wall clock read 3 o'clock in the morning, a time for sound sleep and beautiful dreams. Outside the window, dawn was just glimmering, the mysterious darkness reluctantly but slowly receding. I opened the refrigerator and took out the food necessary to prepare breakfast. Within an hour, the prepared breakfast was waiting for the guests in the dining room, where the rich aroma of brewed coffee was already wafting. The coffee, poured into cups, stood on a tray. Mark, taking the tray with the coffee, went to the bedroom, entered quietly, approached the sleeping people, and spoke louder than usual. "Please hurry, your clothes are being cleaned and ironed in the living room. I am waiting for you in the dining room for breakfast." The woman and her lover opened their eyes and looked at the man standing before them in confusion. Probably the interrupted deep sleep did not allow them to immediately realize what had happened. Where had the man appeared in the bedroom? "Have a cup of coffee, it will cheer you up." He quietly left through the bedroom door. It is difficult, and there is no need to tell about the shock that covered the couple in love. Half an hour later, both, first the pilot, then the woman, appeared in the doorway of the dining room. The condition of the lovers was no less shocking than in the bedroom. "Please come to the table. It's breakfast time. I think you're hungry." "Darling, have a cup of coffee. You like coffee in the morning. I made it just the way you like it." "Here you go. Everything's hot. Eat up. Here's some warm croissants with your coffee, just warmed up in the microwave." "Bon appetit." Mark's impenetrable face, like a stone mask, looked calmly at the woman and the man. The pilot, as a man of his profession, did not make a fuss, mostly kept silent, realizing that no words could explain his presence here. He sat down at the table and decided to have breakfast. His wife, without a drop of blood on her pale face, looked at her husband anxiously, as if she had lost the power of speech. Only thoughts ran through her mind. "Why is he silent? Let him shout at me, call me a whore, hit me, but he is silent. You can go crazy. I was never afraid of him. Why am I now overcome with unbearable terror? My heart is covered with ice. Every cell in my body is shaking with fear because I don't know what will happen next. I'm trembling and I'm afraid." "What's the matter, darling? You don't want coffee? I tried it for you." "Drink," he said sharply and insistently. With a trembling hand, she took the cup and began to drink the coffee, her teeth tapping on the rim of the cup like a little hammer. Mark remained perfectly calm. Only in his mind he held back words of disgust and contempt for his wife. When the pilot finished his breakfast, he rose from the table, thanked Mark and asked, "May I go?" "Of course you're free to go," Mark replied calmly, with an almost invisible chuckle. The pilot went into the hallway and pulled the door handle, but it was locked. He returned without going into the dining room, realizing there was no way to get out the door. One possibility was to leave through the balcony. The 5th floor is high. Looking down from the balcony, he saw an iron fence with sharp spears at the top, almost below him. The house was asleep. No other way out, the pilot thought sadly. After overcoming the fourth floor, he reached the third. Inside, strangely enough, there was a chill. The calmness of the owner surprised him and gave him dark thoughts. It would be better if he shouted, hit me, insulted me with his last words, thought the pilot, but his ominous silence was worse than torture. His nerves gave out. When he threw his leg over the balcony, he felt that the edge of the balcony had fallen off. His leg was unsupported. His other leg had no time to find a secure foothold. His other hand had no time to grab the edge of the balcony, and the man instantly flew down and fell on the spears of the fence. He groaned, the unbearable pain stiffening his body. He lost consciousness and died of a deep wound. As if sensing trouble, her wife looked out the window and saw the airman's breathless body stretched out on the fence. She covered her mouth with her hand and howled wildly. The thick walls of the house were impervious to sound. She paced the room, not knowing what to do. She searched for the phone, but couldn't find it. Measuring the room from corner to corner, she paced the apartment like a hunted animal. Her hands clasped at her temples, she thought frantically, "Oh God, what am I going to do? He won't forgive me. How could I have invited a lover into my apartment? Madness. In my husband's eyes, I see a sentenced death. I seem to hear his words, 'You have committed a terrible wickedness. Redeem her.'" She said something to her husband, but he didn't respond. Mark sat on a chair in the kitchen with his head down, unable to hear or see anyone. Tired of the futile tossing and turning, the despair and endless fear, she ran to the bathroom. Opening the door to the bottom drawer of the dresser, she saw a bottle of vinegar essence. Unconsciously, unable to control herself in a semi-fainting state, she drank half of it in one gulp and collapsed on the floor. A wild pain in her throat stiffened her face, and she gasped and screamed hoarsely for help, but there was silence. The walls, impervious to sound, were silent. A woman with a distorted face was writhing on the floor, her hands clawing at her face in the hope of helping herself, her tortured eyes begging for help with fear and pain. After a few minutes, she stopped screaming. Only a horrible wheezing filled the room with an incomprehensible, desperate sound. The bathroom was empty. With one last wheezing sound, she fell silent in a death spasm. Severe pain and shock stopped her breathing. Death brought her relief. After a while, Mark entered the bathroom. He stood with a blank face, looking at his wife's once beautiful face, now a disfigured mask. When he came out of the bathroom, he felt that his legs, as if chained together, could not move well. His numb hands struggled to dial the ambulance number on the phone, then the police number. When he gave the address and his name, he said in a hushed voice, "Come, there is a woman's body in the apartment, a man's body near the house," and he hung up. He opened the door in the hallway, sat down on a chair. His head was breaking apart, as if a tight tire was whispering to him a promise to tear his head into small pieces. He leaned against the wall and waited for the ambulance and the police. There was a trial. The judge, who was given the case of the convicted Mark Stolen, for the first time in 20 years of judicial practice seemed strange and unusual, had a difficult task to solve. The judge is a woman. She had to turn over in her head a lot of agonizing thoughts. dig through many court cases of adultery in the family, but this case did not give a clear answer. What's the verdict? Murder doesn't fit. He didn't kill. His victims passed judgment on themselves. Some might argue that he gave them a moral boost. At the interrogation, the investigator with the convicted recorded in the protocol, apparently Mark did not hide that he saw with his own eyes the betrayal of his wife, as if lost his mind. Everything he said confirmed that there could be no violence. He never raised his voice. He tried to prove to his lovers, first of all to his wife, by his calmness and strange silence, that treason and betrayal were a crime before the family. His strange actions cleaning clothes, breakfast, coffee, and closed door were necessary for the couple, especially the wife, to realize the meanness of the deed. He couldn't foresee that such a tragedy would happen to them. So he closed the door, disconnected the house phone, took away their cell phones so that they would feel the same agony, the same pain that he had to endure. Of course, after some time, he would let the pilot go and kick his wife out of the house. But when tragedy struck his wife and her lover, his help was useless, although he could have sent his wife to the hospital, which he regretted not doing, leaving her to live with what she herself had done. The most famous lawyer of the city took up the defense of Mark Stolen, and here they were presented to the court the facts of the past life of Mark's wife. Lena was a prostitute who served clients for money. She was married. Her husband, having learned that his wife was constantly cheating on him, got drunk with grief. Tatiana threw him out of the apartment onto the street. He became homeless, slept wherever he could, and was killed in one of the street fights. The legend about his wife, that she fell through the ice as a child and became infertile, was not confirmed by relatives. The life of a prostitute made her infertile. When Mark learned these details from his lawyer, he was shocked. After all, he had fallen in love with her, lost his head, and didn't want to know. He trusted her. She may have wanted to change her life, but her past life was pulling her back into the vortex, like a disease. Testimonies from the church, characterizations of Mark from the company he worked for, from other organizations, characterized him as a decent, respectable, honest, and wonderful family man and leader. Witnesses came forward in his defense, confirming his wife's adultery. The wickedness of this woman is obvious. The pilot's wife spoke at the trial. Of course she was hurt. She had 2 small children in her arms. But she did not defend her husband because she knew about his infidelity, and his leaving his mistresses through balconies was not new to her. She thought it was an accident. Maybe God himself decided to punish the sinner. The judge gave the defendant the last word before passing sentence. Mark had aged during the trial, his graying temples telling of suffering he would not wish on an enemy. He regretted the tragedy, for it was not his intention to harm them physically. He offered his condolences to the pilot's wife. He instructed his lawyer to give his wife a substantial sum of money to support their children. He would continue to support them. The court adjourned for sentencing. The verdict of the court is not guilty because there is no corpus delicti. Mark Stolen was released from custody in the courtroom. The courtroom greeted the verdict with a standing ovation, thanking the judge for his just decision. In life it often happens that a man trusts his chosen one completely. Sometimes love blinds the lover. He becomes deaf. He hears only his beloved. He simply loves. A truly loving person always has a pure soul, and no one is immune to mistakes. Soon, Having sold the apartment, the car, Mark suddenly quit. All attempts to persuade the chief engineer on the part of management, shareholders to stay and continue working were unsuccessful. Mark explained quite simply, "Sorry, friends, I can't, I have to go. I thank you all for your kindness, but my decision is final." Everyone understood the real reason and sincerely regretted the departure of a talented leader and specialist. Connor could not find a place. His faithful friend Mark left him. Mark confided in him, "Connor, you remember our friend Steve? We were all in the military flight school. He got married and moved to Alaska with his wife. 6 years ago, his wife and son were tragically killed. They were out of town, and I went to his funeral alone, helping him financially and supporting him. An irreparable loss. He loved his wife, his son, and the child she was carrying." Grief broke him. He stopped flying, quit his job, and went to the taiga. He got a job as a gamekeeper and still lives and works there. I found out his exact coordinates and wrote him a letter. Suddenly, I got a letter back from Steve. He was waiting for me. He wrote that I had helped him once, and now he would help me. Soulmates feel the same pain. Connor couldn't stand it. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Mark, I can't be without you. We've been together a lifetime." "It's okay. You'll come visit us, Will Hunt." "I can't stay here." "I gave the money," he said, "the amount I got for selling the apartment, to Lucy, the dead pilot's wife. A good woman," she cried. "She was sorry I was leaving. She understands everything. I've had bad luck with women, and I'm not going to test them anymore. I'm going to buy some hunting equipment. I gave Steve a nice rifle. Maybe I'll get a job as a game warden. I'm telling you right now, but I can't hear myself. Time will tell how we're going to live our lives." You know, Steve wrote in his letter that the forest is the best healer for the bleeding soul. The forest has its own laws, hard but fair. Only there can I find peace and forgiveness. The chance to start a new life I, strangely enough, gave myself an accident. The friends embraced. The next day, Mark left for Alaska.